Thank you very much. Thank you to Justin. As Justin's pointed out, I have spent the best part of 3 decades working with him and intermittently slowing his rise to global power. So Justin would be even more powerful if I had not intervened at various times in his career. But it's fantastic to be back here with New York Media Lab. We have hosted this event in partnership for 3 years, and it's part of our commitment to engage with New York City's universities, specifically around some of the topics that we're talking about today. So I'd like to thank Justin, I'd like to thank Clay Estroth, Gideon Mann, Chris Collins, Haim Haas, Jennifer Hayhurst, and the rest of the event staff here who've done so much. And you're going to hear quite a lot from some Bloomberg people later. And this year's program is going to look quite heavily at topics such as the effect of AI on a global economy, R&D priorities for media, a whole series of different particular things. In previous incarnations, at previous versions of this, I have stood here and delivered a kind of longish, rather boring speech about what Bloomberg has been doing in this area. This time I'm going to spare you that, partly for several reasons, partly because we have Beth Smith, who will have IBM, who we can come and talk to, partly also because I've got people like Chris Collins and Clay are going to come up later and talk about it in much more detail and with more knowledge than me. But lastly, also because I think there are other things that we can push on. And I'm going to say a few things at the beginning. I'm going to say that I think that when you look at AI at the moment and machine learning and what it's doing, I think there are sort of 4 main debates about that. And the first is the impact on jobs, which loosely translated is, are journalists going to be replaced by robots? Then you have all the arguments about fake news. And then you have the argument about who controls the data, the issue of privacy, what are the ethics of both companies, what should the regulation be? And somewhere as a sort of 4th element, but it's interesting how often if you talk to people who are not specialists, like many of these in this room, come back to it. I was talking to some young people last night, this issue about ghettoization, about whether if you personalize media, you end up with people just living in one particular area. Now, I should stress that I personally, as I said to you last year, I'm an optimist on virtually all of this, and I'll come back to discussing that with Beth. But I think on the whole, AI is helping us cover far more, that it's not on the whole pushing journalists out of jobs, that it's changing the way that jobs are done. And I also think that in the long term, it definitely helps, I think, weed out fake news. And it gives more room to people to be able to read the news that they want to hear. And I think for us here, that's something that we believe in quite passionately. I'm going to really quickly just say the 4 main things that we're doing here, just as a way of introduction on that. And I think really when we look at AI from the newsroom and machine learning, there's really kind of 4 areas. And the first is the automation of repeatable events. So when a company like IBM releases its earnings, when I first came here, you had a small squadron of people whose job was to wrap out headlines as quickly as possible. Now what happens, that speed team of people sit there the previous night with a technology we call Cyborg, and we work out templates and things like that so that when the earnings do come out, we can scrape them, we can put them into forms. But we do that all the time with humans involved, because from our point of view, it's even more essential to get these things right than it is to do it rapidly. And so when we say roughly 30% of the 5,000 odd stories we deliver every day are somewhat automated, then that's true. But it is, the key word in that is somewhat, because it always tends to be from our end, and again, this is something I'll come back and talk to Beth about, it tends to be a world where it's machines and people working together rather than one coming in place of the other. And what's interesting to us, at least, is it's expanded dramatically the spread of what we can do. The second area where it's making a big difference to us sounds rather more mundane, but if you're a journalist, it's not. And that's automating the craft of journalism. And that's things as simple as just simply doing automatic translation and stuff. But that actually is quite a big thing if you think about it. At the moment, we, Bloomberg, like many other English-speaking organizations, make a huge priority in places like Argentina or Thailand of hiring people who can speak and write in English. Well, maybe that will begin to change. We will push more to hire people who are extremely good in any language, because we know that we can begin to translate them quickly into other things. And the same goes for other little ways in which it's making our jobs easier. Any poor people who are recording this, and then in the old days you'd have to go back and transcribe it. Now you can go back and you can begin to use a machine to do it instead. The third area where we think this is making a big difference is signaling. And that really comes in two forms. We have a unit here called Social Velocity, which goes out and sits there, a team of about 30 people with a great, big, huge number of computers scouring the world for social media, because social media tends to be the place where a lot of dramatic news is first noticed. And we do look for somewhat ghoulish words like resignation or assassination. And then you follow those up. The computer says, look, I think something is happening here, and asks a question of people, of journalists, of whether they can check that and find out whether it has happened or not. And that obviously, from our point of view, is something that's incredibly important. The other side of it is to do with data. As you can understand, we have vast amounts of data here. And what we again try to do there is the machine points out that a statistic has suddenly been passed or gone by. Germany's GDP is now growing more slowly than Italy's for the first time for 13 years, or whatever it is. That was an entirely made-up statistic. But whatever it is, it then asks a question of, say, the economics reporter. It says, do you want to write a story about that? And that, again, changes the relationship, I think, between reporters and editors, because it gives the editor, at the end of it, the possibility of coming back and saying, look, you were told that this had happened, and you decided not to write a story, which may or may not have been fair. But in this case, it suddenly became very important. And then the last area, and the one which I know we'll come back to later, is this idea of personalizing news, of trying to get it targeted at particular people. And that is something which I know that we're all looking at. I still regard it as like the holy grail of journalism. It's something which I think goes all the way back to the internet, even at The Economist, where you're trying to look at ideas like this. And it's something which nobody has, I think, quite yet cracked, but we think we're getting a little bit closer to it. My point about all these things, as I said at the beginning, I am an optimist about all this. I really genuinely think that this will change our industry for the better. I think there have always been, if you look back through history, there have always been huge waves of new technology come into our business. They cause disruption. You usually get an upsurge of things like fake news. You could see that with the printing press, the steam printing press when it came in 1801. You had fake pamphlets coming out everywhere because you suddenly had a technology that could produce 10 times as many pages as before. But what happens in the end is readers begin to turn towards things they trust and they believe in. And so in that case, many of the brands that we now think of as the established ones, whether it's the New York Times or indeed The Economist, sadly Bloomberg was a little bit later, those are the things that rose at that time because consumers wanted something they could trust. And my instinct is that is happening again, not just for consumers, but also for advertisers. Anyway, I will now stop my particular lines on this and welcome to the stage Beth Smith. I should say that Beth is the general manager of Watson. She talks to a lot of leaders if you come through here. On IBM, I'll quickly say two things, which I didn't know. Firstly, that IBM, I think, we got 1,600 patents last year. Come sit down. It had 1,600 patents last year in AI. But the other bit is if you want to look at the history of big data and IBM's involvement in this all over time, is I think the first example of big data we could find was back in 1937 when IBM was used by the federal government to track Social Security when it first came in. So you are involved in a company that has had all those things. Can we just start with the first thing I talked about, which was the idea of jobs and what's going to happen. From our end, we've seen it as this being a sort of hybrid experience, that it's a mixture between machines and people. How does it look from IBM?
Yeah, so thanks, John, for having me, and for all of you to be here to spend a few minutes with us. I think you've said it well on this point of hybrid. I might use the word augment, to end up helping people in the jobs that they do every day. I do believe, though, frankly, that maybe all jobs will change in some way. And it'll be important about how people keep their skills up so that they are ready for those changes, and it helps them then do a better job of whatever their profession is and whatever their particular job is.
But do you think on the whole it will be fully autonomous, or will it be a type of thing which we've discovered here, where it tends to be the machine and the human both working with each other?
That's exactly what I mean by augment. It's going to be about the two together. And I think that's what we'll definitely see in our lifetime. There'll be some things that'll be a lot more automated as a part of it. Let me actually try to bring it to life with an example. Lexus had a recent launch in Europe for their new ES model, which is an executive sedan. And for that advertisement, it was really important for their brand to come through, the value of this product to come through, etc. But in order to help the professionals that were a part of it, they used AI to analyze 15 years of award-winning ads and other forms of launch promotion. They included things like data about how people react emotionally to products and that sort of thing. They then also included key points about the new product and about their brand, because they also wanted to be sure that the output of all this was not just more of what had happened over the past 15 years. So out of that, AI was able to analyze that. Think about how much data that is. AI was able to analyze that and now provide to an Oscar film-winning person, Kevin McDonald, be able to provide to him, let's call it a draft script, that's a starting point to then create this promotion. So to me, I like to use that example or things like that because it's such a creative aspect, and it's about how to bring together human with the machine to do something creative.
Isn't this exactly the sort of thing that would scare some people, because they would think, gosh, copywriting, that is right at the creative side of things. It's a bit like in my industry, long-form journalism, you could never do that. But isn't this an example that AI can go a lot further than people currently think? And so people who think their jobs are safe perhaps aren't.
Well, what I actually think is on that is back to the point I made about, let's just assume everybody's is going to change. So what are you going to do to embrace it? And John, you actually talked about in the opening how all of us have leveraged technology in our lifetime. It's a similar situation as a part of it. So it's about getting skills and understanding. It's not just about the data scientists and the mathematicians that are going to do the models and the algorithms. It's also about attorneys and engineers and artists and other financial advisors, et cetera, all leveraging it as they apply it to whatever their business.
And do you think
people
are going to need training in this? I mean, there's training.
Yes.
It's one of those rather worthy subjects.
Yep.
But do you think that basically the gap between the workforce's current skills and the ones people are going to need in the world you talk about, that is a large gap, or and where are the biggest areas?
Actually, there have been a number of studies done that executives say something on the order of about 63% or so of what they see as a challenge of widespread adoption of AI is the skills point. Yeah. And so, yes, people are going to need help in advancing the skills. That's one of the things that we're focused on, is how do we help people do that. We've done it across our 380,000 employees worldwide, and now we're leveraging that in how we can help other companies with the same point of how do they increase their skills to really apply this to whatever their business is.
What are the main lessons you've learned so far on that? Is there one sort of standout one that particular sorts of people need particular sorts of training, or is there?
Well, it varies. You've got people that are going to interact more closely with the algorithms and the models, and that's about machine learning and data science skills, and then you've got, like I mentioned, engineers, oil and gas engineers, or attorneys, or contact center agents, and how they're going to leverage it. It actually brings up, for a different industry, it brings to my mind a different example. So we do a lot of work with Royal Bank of Scotland, and they have a number of virtual assistants, some that are for self-service for their customers, and some that are there to aid various professionals of the disciplines across the company. And one happens to be named, people always brand these things, one happens to be named Marge. And Marge is there to help with mortgages. And so now Marge's colleagues recognize Marge as she. They actually, for Valentine's Day, they actually created a poem for her because she's a part of what, they're doing as a part of this. So this was something that Marge's colleagues had to learn how to apply that. The other thing that comes to mind with Royal Bank of Scotland is they've actually created a new job role called a conversational analyst. So this is not about somebody dealing with the core of the AI science. This is about somebody that understands the digital interaction and the customer experience that they want to provide for their brand, and how to best optimize that by using the technology. And so they have a whole nother job role because of it.
Is that things like the sort of tone of voice somebody uses, or what is it? Is it kind of humor? Is it?
Yes, but I would say it goes even deeper than that. Yes, of course, it's, tone and recognizing, is this something that we want to escalate to a human immediately or not? But it's also about better understanding what their customers are coming to their site and inquiring about, and not just asking, but doing. It's not just about FAQs and an easier way to find answers to standard questions. It's also about the job you're trying to do, as the customer, as the consumer, the job you're trying to do. So part of what the conversational analyst is doing is letting the technology help guide them on the analytics around that experience with their client, their customers, and what their customers are interested in, trying to do, how often they come to do it, various things like that, so they can optimize that experience.
I mean, you run Watson, probably, I suppose, for many of us, the most famous out of the sort of various sort of robots of the future, if I can put it that way. But how good is that technology now at working out patterns, at kind of working out what we would want, but we don't know we would want, that sort of thing. So what's your kind of reading on that at the moment?
So I think, John, a key point to think about is there's a lot of different science. There's a lot of math as a part of it, and it can be very domain oriented or very process oriented. But the thing that's very common about it is it's about recognizing and surfacing patterns, and then being able to predict those patterns. And that's where, it can become something that is better than a human in places, that can then help the human see, okay, this is what that pattern was that was hidden in that information. Just think about the volume of data or information that everybody's trying to build upon, and how do you surface insights from that to augment the knowledge you already have as a part of it. So that pattern matching is what I would say, in simple terms, is the common aspect of the technology. And it's very good at that. It learns domains and things that then it can help find the pattern as a part of it. And it's a very natural thing. And you can see it from, how to help answer what somebody might come to you self-service to try to do some task, like the ones I was talking about earlier. You can see it in the example of the Lexus ad, like I was talking about earlier. And that same thing applies in supply chain and inventory management.
Do you think there's something where people feel happier about this when it's sort of numbers and things? I sense maybe in this room when people when I'm talking about IBM's earnings, people feel quite happy about the idea that can somehow be automated and AI'd and put through things. But when it's actually things like working out what I might want before I know, that's a more kind of difficult area. I mean, is there an element of that at all?
Well, I think
all of us... Or do you think consumers are already accepting that they're just saying, this is great, I want more of it?
Well, all of us, when we shop, we get recommendations. That's a part of it. It's determined our patterns, and it's now recommending something. It's sort of predicting what the next pattern might be as a part of it. I think what's really important with it is a level of explainability. Because if we think about ourselves as consumers, we've gotten used to the fact that we shop, and based on our patterns, we will get some recommendations, and we most of the time can see the connection and are okay with that, and we're going to choose whether or not we want the recommendation or not. Now you start thinking about it in the middle of a business process. Is this mortgage going to be approved or not? Now you're like, well, how do I know what's a part of it? So it's about explainability of what's happening in that so that it now becomes obvious. Is the mortgage recommended for approval because of credit history, because of location of property, because of other factors? What really is it that said approve or deny? So that's why we focused, in addition to some of the capability that Watson has about these pre-built patterns, we've also focused on how to provide the technology to sort of open up that black box, if you will, help explain that black box.
So transparency becomes incredibly important. And do you think that companies, I have no idea where media companies score on this, but do companies as a whole, are they beginning to get that actually they can't just present people with choices, they have to explain it a bit so that people feel more comfortable with it?
Well, I do think it varies by industry. As you can imagine, the heavily regulated industries, banking, for example, this becomes a really, really important thing because it's about the guidelines that they have to adhere to. And so it's the rules, from that standpoint. But I do believe more and more all businesses are seeing it as, how do you help whoever the human stakeholders in this, how do you help them better embrace? And you help them better embrace by them being comfortable with it, and therefore the transparency and the explainability as a part of it.
When you look at our industry, there's machines and media. How do you genuinely sort of rank us in this? Are we Luddites or are we advanced? Where do we sit?
On the point of transparency, I would say you're probably not the leaders there. Again, I would go back to this point on regulations. That's driving the leaders as a part of it. But I do believe...
Could also be, I'm slightly thinking aloud, it could also be that in our industry a lot of the information is gathered in the bigger platforms. You have Google, Facebook, all those things possibly have more information than, say, the New York Times or the BBC or whoever you're thinking about.
Well, I think when you think about data in general, all of what you just described is data. When you think about data in general, there is a lot out there. I mean, you talked about one of the first big data examples from before our time as a part of it. But when we look at what customers are doing, 80% of their data is actually inside their businesses. And it's about how they can ultimately unlock that and how they can get value from that that's really an asset to them.
We just begun to move a little bit towards it, this whole question of ethics. You mentioned regulations. Obviously, there are regulations companies have to follow. But the clients you're talking to, are they beginning to think quite hard about issues like privacy, about all these different... this zone about how much should a company know about you, what data should it reveal? My impression is that that's a mounting concern for people because people are getting embarrassed by bits of it and things like that. Is that fair?
Well, it's certainly this point of trust and transparency and privacy and protection of data is top of mind. of pretty much all clients. That's part of why, we have focused the way we have in helping clients, in that we recognize their data is their asset. I mean, it's really a very, very valuable asset. And when you think about 80% of it being in their business, then they're sitting on a treasure trove here. And so when we think about that, we've focused in on technology that can help them get the value with that without having to expose it and mix it in with other things, which is a big point of how we've focused around taking this technology to businesses as a part of it.
And is there a general, again, I'm being very impressionistic, but looking around the world, there seems to be a mounting thing about privacy and consumers on the whole wanting to have slightly more control of their data. Does that ring true with what you're seeing?
Well, depending on the industry and the client, yes. And I would also say, John, it also goes into, you mentioned GDPR, it also goes into governments around the world, becoming a lot more aware and purposeful as a part of it, which is why we've done and are doing some of the things that we're doing with them. I mean, we welcome people being informed, and we welcome, governments taking a real interest in this technology and how this technology can move forward.
It's a regional difference. Again, my impression is in Europe, privacy seems to be something more to the fore than in America.
I wouldn't say that there's any particular difference in regions. You get different kinds of examples. But if I just step back on the point I was making a minute ago, we have been a part of advising the National AI Strategy here in the United States. We've also been a part of the recent work that the European Union has done around releasing guidelines around AI. So maybe they're all somewhat unique.
But there's a general move to suddenly sort of consider this from a society point of view. And will that make a difference to the sort of companies that get involved in this? I mean, do you now find, from an IBM point of view, you're in competition with completely new forces who are coming at this from a different angle, or is it still that the big tech companies that are ahead on this stuff?
So, when I step back and really look at the whole landscape, and where we focus, and therefore what we do to provide value to our clients, I want to just bring it back, because it's really about their business. And data is an asset and an enabler to what their business can do. And you think about that, and then how we are focused on that. That means we're focused on helping our customers with how they serve their customers, how they serve their employees, how they reimagine, transform their businesses, pretty much end to end when you think about it. And that's all about leveraging the data that is applicable in their world, and their world includes their business walls out to their customer ecosystem as a part of it.
What about IBM in that? I was just intrigued. I was thinking about you as an advisor to businesses, but when you look at yourselves, do you think you've changed the way you think about privacy, the way you think about these other issues?
I think it's one of our foundational aspects that's been in the company for a long time. We're coming up on 108, if I remember correctly. 108 years coming up here in June. And when you think back about the things that IBM has done over the years and the focus that we have had on innovation that mattered, but also grounded in a point of respect, trust, privacy, etc., it's applying those things to today's technical opportunities.
That's quite an interesting balance, though, isn't there? Between, on the one hand, your knowledge and the data you have is in a sense a massive competitive advantage. On the other hand, you have consumers slightly saying, well, maybe that's my data. I'm not applying it particularly to IBM. But I would guess that you're somewhere in the front of that particular debate. I mean, and does that mean you have to adjust it at all and say, well, actually, no, we should give that back to consumers, or this is the transparent
well,
thing
that
to
becomes
do?
that becomes how our customers interact with their customers. Point. But we have been very strong in recognizing that we have to enable our customers to be able to interact with their customers the way their customers support them doing that. So it comes to some technology points to enable that. And it actually, when you think about the science and the core technology of AI, it has positioned us to actually approach it in different ways. So, there's the techniques of AI have been around for a while. But there's been some things in recent years that kind of opened it up and opened up the opportunity. In addition to things like compute, et cetera, it's also been access to a lot of data. Because when you think about the deep learning aspects that have brought AI to life, so to speak, from a science standpoint, they require a lot of training data. And when I say a lot, I mean millions of training data examples. Companies don't have access to that. I mean, even a company that has big data and lots of data, they're probably not at that scale, and they're certainly not at that scale where it has been labeled and is annotated, et cetera, to be able to train a system. So things that we've done is to focus in on recognizing, because clients need to be able to use their data, because of our customers need to be able to use their data for their business advantage, and they need to protect the relationship with their customers, then we use techniques to enable the value of AI without assuming that there's going to be massive amounts of labeled data. So we focused in on some different things to do that.
If you're just sort of looking lastly at the future, you go forward 5 years, I know your industry is moving incredibly quickly, but is there one sort of technological breakthrough, one element that you think is a year away or 2 years away that will make a massive difference? I mean, is it face recognition? Is it what sort of technology do you really want to see in your field?
So when you talk about a year away, it's within reach, no question about that. And it comes down to further advancements around the pillars of trust. So is it fair? Is the model fair? Is it explainable? So some of the examples I was given earlier, is it robust? Is it accountable? So can you trace things? So if you go back to my mortgage example earlier, think about somebody that might have been denied, and then think about a period of time has gone by, and now you need to understand why that person was denied. You need traceability, if you will, from the actual decision that was made to why that was the case, potentially lineage back to the model and the data that was used. So it gets into some aspects of that. And all of that, we've done initial aspects of that, and we've got more work to come. But I bring those things up, John, because this matters to people. No matter what survey you look at, they're anywhere from low 90% to high 90%. Companies believe that they will get competitive advantage by leveraging AI in their business. Yet, only about 5% or so are adopting it at major scale across their business. And there's two main things that challenge them from doing that. And one is skills, which we talked about already. And the other is this point of, but do I know what's happening? Do I understand what's happening, and how do I go about doing that? So that's why I'd say, this is the part that is now ripe to help people accelerate.
So it's not a lack of data, it's a lack of context. It's a lack of ability to understand what the data specifically relates to.
Or what the decision was that the AI recommended or decided, or that sort of thing, and put the two together.
Putting on your blue sky Watson hat. I mean, is there a particular?
I have a long list.
I can see you answered in a very sort of processed way. Is there a technology out there that you think will be the next? In my rather humble remarks, I talked about things like voice recognition, things like that. Is there another big part of AI that's coming up just around the corner? that you'll put in an advert with Bob Dylan or whatever you...
Oh, good land. So we have a lot of science underway, and there's a long list. And I think when you look back a year or two or three from now, we will have seen that it all accelerates much, like maybe even more so than what we've seen over the last few years.
So it's a cumulative thing where it'll keep getting
and there's
bigger
more
and bigger.
Advancements along the way.
And are you confident? I mean, one last thing which just occurred to me whilst you were talking is that you said that companies have a degree of control over these things, but they don't have as much as, and the company only has so much. An obvious point at the moment in what's happening is you have China, and some governments have a lot more power than, or would appear to have a lot more power in this field than companies. Do you feel as if America will still be the centre of this? You can say yes. It's very easier. In your patriotic role.
Look, we are definitely global. There's no question about that. And we work with a lot of global companies and a lot of regional companies as a part of it. And so, I'm just going to go back to what I shared with you on the policy point, because I think that's the aspect of it is we need to welcome governments becoming more informed. And we need to do what we can to help advise and be sure that they're based on that. And then the technologist in me says we also need to constantly keep pushing innovation and how we can continue to advance technology. I'd ask everybody to reflect on your life and just what you've seen happen with technology over that. And I don't think any of us want that to stop.
Very good way to end. Thank you very much, Beth, for starting us so well.
Yes, thank you.